Welcome to Faggot and other LGBTQ2 plus stories. I'm Benedict, and this is both my public and private story. The word faggot in any way, shape, or form is an offensive, ignorant word used to hurt and demean individuals. And it's been that way since it was first created, or its first inception in print, in 1914 in the United States. Since throughout that history, the gay community has rallied around itself to try and raise its own sense of self-pride. And this is called Into the Light. And this is my first experience with my own dealing and addressing my own sexuality while I was a student at Western back in 1991. It's called Into the Light because it's that moment of understanding and acceptance of who you are as a person. Not straight, not part of the normative terms of society, but a gay individuals living on the margins. Part of that is the blinding realization that you're just a little different, and yet at the same time you can see the pelvis, these are legs, and yet at the time I was still felt very bound by this figure. Social conventions, heteronormative stances, and that feeling of, as a man, you're expected to live in lane A and never veer from that lane. This piece is called Throw Another Faggot on the Fire. It deals with heresy and the early formations of that hateful word as something to be burnt and destroyed, often by heretics, witches in the mid-centuries. It's made of wood, it's decorative, it's bright. And the idea is that while the term is offensive, faggots are beautiful things. So this was the primary piece. This is where I started this entire idea of faggots, is with this most contentious thing and being able to address it and literalize it in 3 dimensions. So I started this series in 2017. This is the second one in that body of work. It's called You're a Big Faggot. And I really want to literally illustrate those words and how ironic or ridiculous it is when you call someone a big fag. This is a big fag, a large decorative bundle of sticks. And part of this was sort of an in-your-face response, but also showing members of the gay community, when you're met with such offense, that this is what they're talking about, and you should be able to take that in with a grain of salt or a grain of humor at other people's ignorance. This is the third piece in the original rendering of the Faggot series. This is called Faggot Proud, and it has to do with my working methodology of using found and repurposed objects. The fireplace grate was rusted. I sanded it, polished it, cleaned it up, painted it, added brass accents, and of course the faggot itself is no longer broken. It's golden and bejeweled, and that individuals in the gay community should feel proud of who they are. And this is that first beginning sense of turning that awful, hateful word and its connotations into something more positive. This is the coup de grace, my masterpiece from this show. It's called Golden Faggot, and it's based on Michelangelo's Golden Mean, perfect body proportions at 6 feet tall. And it's painted gold because just because you're gay doesn't mean you're not perfect as you are. And this is what this is about. It's about elevating individuals' sense of pride and that you are exceptional and beautiful who and how you are. It was important. Again, found objects, branches from my yard, hand cut, sanded, varnished, or primed, painted, varnished. The stand is mixed media from a footstool, a built stand, and astroturf, again, to elevate that sense of pride. It is the centerpiece of the show, and I think it's a feeling that hopefully most people walk away from the show with, is that they are beautiful and they do have self-worth. So after Golden Faggot, and having raised that sense of value, then how do you put that into three-dimensional objects and create that sense of value in the individual? Well, that was done again using found objects and maple dowels. The piece here on my right is called Standing Proud. 6 feet tall, like any individual, average individual I should say, and it is designed to create that as an individual standing proud of who they are. And equally, this piece here is called Pillar of Pride. And same thing, from the golden ring of the base rises up these pillars of the pride colors. And it's that sense of rising up in strength and beauty that I was trying to capture in this mixed media piece. Dandy is probably one of my favorite and probably one of the most convoluted pieces. It involves 35 hand-cut, sanded, and varnished sticks with silk cord on an oak base with manufactured saddles and its own plinth. If you don't understand the word dandy, it's an early term for a metrosexual, someone who dresses well and stands out amongst the masculine crowd. And though it's not directly related to the gay community, if you look back when gay became unfavorable in the 1880s in Britain through the trial of Oscar Wilde, this is what brings me to that point of being a fancy man, that somehow through the ages that sense of self-worth was lost socially. And this piece tries to recapture that. This is called Flying Proud, and it's actually one of the pieces that I am most proud of. It was most technically challenging. It required special hardware. It required a special manufacture of an oak board. It also required, after the piece was almost done, having to sand down all these sticks again so they would fit through the holes. But it really does capture that sense of pride of leaving the page and elevating and flying, raising yourself up. And to me, I just think it's beautiful. I actually cried a little bit when I put it on the wall. And while it's the most challenging, I think it's one of the strongest pieces, and it really is the core anchor to this entire exhibit. As artists know, doing multiples is a part of developing a professional career. As a sculptor, that's not usually something most sculptors do. They're one-offs. But this is an opportunity in this piece called Proud, in 5 different pieces, to do that, to do a series of works. And it's the same sort of concept. Oak, its own plinth, saddles, and then 6 hand-sanded and painted and varnished logs in order to capture the rainbow flag and that sense of elevated pride. So now we're approaching the last 2 pieces in the Faggot series before we move on to other stories. And these are probably, and I mentioned earlier, this is both a public and a personal exhibit. And for me, having experienced a lot of traumas in my life around my sexuality as a soldier, remember the LGBT purge lawsuit, this and the next piece were extremely difficult, not in their technical requirements, but in the emotional requirements. Behind me is I Want to Scream. 6 individual paintings, all of the same subject matter. I am not a faggot. And I hear it daily from patrons in the bars, kids on the street. And it's like that offense is never far from my ears. And it's like, it's inescapable. And I wanted to put that on canvas, or in this case, on board and hand-painted frames. Because it is difficult to live with that animosity and hatred around you every single day of your life. Yet all the members of the gay community do that, whether they're directly affected or just have to be casual passerbys of random hate acts. It never goes away. And as a member of the gay community, you're always coming out and always having to reveal your sexuality where straight people don't. And it's a tremendous burden, both emotionally and physically, for many people within the community. And this piece tries to capture that anxiety, that anger, that frustration, that I want to scream. And while I think this is one of the most beautiful pieces in the entire show, it's called Defense if Faggot, Fence, F-E-N-C-E. It's also one of those very emotional ones because being part of that purge lawsuit and living in the army, it created PTSD in me that I was diagnosed with earlier this year. And having to come to terms with building fences around my life, limiting my life and limiting my exposure to that violence. This is that internal angst manifested and made real. It's maple and steel, but it's a fence. And the only recognition around the pride colors is little dots on each side that are just subtle and almost, you can miss them if you weren't looking for them. And I think that's part of being defensive, is hiding that most valuable part of who you are, your sexuality, your love for people, love for yourself, and love for your lover. And oftentimes, that normative stance has been denied members of the gay community. Equally, the base is solid oak and stainless steel. So it really is taking that, again, that most horrific moments in your personal growth and saying that it can be beautiful too. So now we move from three-dimensional to two-dimensional piece. And while this is large and beautiful, this is what I would call a palette painting. So this was made from the leftover paint from larger paintings, and then having to go in and finish the detail of the faggot. But the whole idea is, I am not a faggot. I am not a bundle of wood, nor do I look like a bundle of wood. I'm flesh and blood, and human, and need of love, and wanting to love like everybody else in the world. And this captures part of that angst. So while it captures many things, the rainbow flag behind also captures that sense of hope and renewal. And hopefully comes through and shines through the faggot even, again, to capture that sense of empowerment. So in the era of Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter, and the rise of the Pride movement, this piece was designed to capture that. Because what I found, and sometimes I may have been at fault too, but when people advocate for individuals on the margins, they're often advocating for their section of those people on the margins. And this piece wants to capture all of that, in that it is not so black and white. A visible minority and gay is twice as marginalized as either one of those groups separately. Religious minorities face tremendous persecution within their own faith because of who they are. And this piece tries to capture that. The background is not one single color. There's 6 different blacks and grays in there. The word faggot is like a wound dripping that animosity and the pain felt at receiving this type of hateful language. And this piece tries to capture all that as simply as possible. In the middle of all this, between 2017 and 2021, now working on this body of work, came up the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots in 1969 in Stonewall, New York, at the Stonewall Bar and Grill, basically launching the Pride movement in North America. In 2019 was the 50th anniversary of that celebration, and this was my response to it, that we are still lovers in a dangerous time, that in spite of, in Canada, gay rights, equal marriage, adding to the Constitution, in spite of all that, hate crimes continue to rise. And this sort of captures that. As a nation, Canada, that while things have progressed, the gay community is still a target of animosity, and it's still dangerous to be exposed in many areas of our community as a member of the gay community, and to be loud and proud. And with all great art comes what they call the happy accident. And this is called Elevate Your Pride. And from the series of Proud, where there are 5 of these, for some reason, I made 6. Maybe because there's 6 colors in the rainbow, I just happened to make 6. And when I got them all done, I realized I had an extra piece, an extra bundle of faggots. And so I took that opportunity to recreate the stainless steel ladder, and the concept around elevating your pride. That many in the gay community feel their life is at the bottom, that they can only accept less than, that their sexuality is not something for them to celebrate, but to be victimized by. And those are emotions and feelings that I have felt for much of my own life. And part of this process is my own revaluing my own life, my own sexuality, and taking pride in who I am and elevating my own pride. And I hope this message is shared with many people, and other people can start that journey as well. So, as an artist, you create work and submit them to exhibits. Sometimes they get accepted, sometimes they don't. For some reason, this piece rarely got accepted to many exhibits, and I've submitted to a number 1. And I think because it's kind of in your face. It's called King of the Queers, and it's based on the biblical story of Jesus, the King of the Jews. But if you really are a man or person of faith and believe in Jesus, then you know Jesus was the Savior for all. And he brought you the one commandment: love your God with your whole heart and your neighbor as yourself. And nowhere in there does it talk about hating homosexuals or animosity of any shape or form. And this piece came from that idea. It's a palette painting, so I started with scraps of paper and eventually built this internal image up to this, glued it to a board, and finished the frame and made this one sort of solid piece. And it reminds me of a Renaissance painting where, you know, there's damage and marks to it, but it really captures that sense of old world values and that I think many in the gay community have, and certainly have a lot of faith. There's that concept of being two-spirited within the Aboriginal community, that you both have a masculine and feminine spirit, and by so you are closer to God, or considered a shaman, having a direct voice to God. And I don't know why anyone would find that offensive, but apparently many people do. This piece was really originally created as part of epigenetics conference several years ago. And while it wasn't the main piece, this is part of my working process of creating these collages, or certainly the images that I was using, casting off, but keeping them and creating them to make another piece of work. So the idea that Billy's a little off originally deals with genetics. But in the gay community, it's the same sort of thing. If you're gay, you're not quite right. You're just a little off. And this piece talks about that. But when you look at it, there's nothing off. They're perfect scenes of family, of caring, and a normative life. And so it's not the reality that people are off. It's the perception of the world that somehow this is not what is normal. So this grouping of paintings here are what I would call my human sexuality and interaction. On the left here, making a proud choice in who you date, who you make friends with. Again, because there's a lot of harm, a lot of hurt within the gay community, which means some people carry that harm and hurt with them into their relationships. This one here, what's your sign? Yes or no, maybe or yes. It's fun, it's playful, it's tongue-in-cheek, and it's meant to be all of those things. The final piece here to my right is Deux maris en amour, two husbands in love. And it really does talk about the whole story, from making that choice, finding someone, to developing that relationship, to what is now acceptable as marriage within Canada. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about sex when it comes to the gay community, because that's what the world expects. But I also like to throw in a bit of humor in that. So I have two pieces here. This one is called The Competition, because amongst the gay community, it's not about often the person, it's about the size of your penis. And I don't know how that makes a substantial relationship, but there are many people who call themselves size queens. And so this is actually based on Japanese and Chinese henna cartoons Drawings. One of my favorites is a Japanese cartoon of a man with large testicles and a penis that he has to carry on around in a wheelbarrow. But that's part of ancient Asian mythology and culture, and this is my attempt to capture that through a palette painting. This piece called Cowboy Flag is that same sort of thing. You know, text is straight and square as possible, but the whole idea of Brokeback Mountain is really captured in this. And again, this was just a fun palette painting, but you know, there's that saying, you know, save a horse, ride a cowboy. That's what we're talking about here. And this is the final piece of the show. In fact, it's a drawing I did earlier this year, mixed media again, a collage, paper on paper, acrylic on paper, and it's called Stepping Out into the World. And I added a little pink triangle to sort of make it more gay friendly, but it really is that whole idea of every time you step out of your home, you're coming out into the world, and coming out as a gay individual, or choosing to hide that from the world for your own self-protection. And this addresses that, I think, in a very beautiful and creative way. Again, a palette painting, this was done by cleaning off my brushes. And that is it. Faggots and other LGBTQ2 stories. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all those who supported me on this journey. And thank you for taking the time to share this with me.
A little more in your head.